So welcome everyone tonight to the ITBA TAMS information session. My name is Hannah and I'm the Education Coordinator with the ITBA. And the inclusion of the equine sector in TAMS will be a huge benefit to breeders, and the ITBA are here to answer any questions that breeders might have around grants and the applications. We hope tonight is going to be very informative to everyone, and it will be one of a couple of sessions that we will run on information around this topic. Joining us tonight is ITBA CEO Una Tormey and Breian Carroll, Managing Director and Senior Agronomist with Carroll Consultancy. So I will now hand over to Una.
Thanks, Hannah. Good evening, everyone, and you're very welcome to ITBA's TAMS information webinar. My name is Una Tormey and I am CEO of the Irish Thoroughbred Breeders Association. As Hannah mentioned, this is the first in a number of planned information evenings with the aim to provide breeders with as much detail as possible around TAMS, focusing mainly on the eligibility and the criteria around eligibility and the application process itself. For any breeders that may be based in the west of Ireland, the ITBA have an open breeders evening this coming Thursday in the Shearwater Hotel in Ballinasloe. It's open and free for all to attend, and TAMS will be one of many topics for discussion. Also joining us on the night will be representatives from ITM, from Weatherby's and from the Irish Equine Centre. So for any further details of that, you can contact the office directly. ITBA, alongside a number of industry stakeholders, were involved in a series of submissions made to the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine for the inclusion of the equine sector under TAMS. On behalf of ITBA, I would like to thank Chairman Kathy Grassick and the ITBA Council for the continuous work they do around this and many other areas on behalf of Irish breeders. As part of the CAP strategic plan, TAMS, which is the Targeted Agricultural Modernisation Scheme, provides funding for on-farm capital investment and will be in place for 5 years with the budget of 370 million, and that was announced by Minister for Agriculture, Food and the Marine, Charlie McConalogue, together with Ministers of State Pippa Hackett and Minister Martin Hayden earlier this year. Equine investments will be available under the Animal Welfare and Nutrient Storage Scheme at a grant rate of 40% and 60% for those qualifying as young farmers. And we'll go into it in further detail, but applications under this scheme, the Animal Welfare and Nutrient Storage Scheme, will open or are planned to open in the coming days and will remain open until the 16th of June. We're delighted this evening to have Breian Carroll join us. We thank him just very much for his time. Breian will also be with us this coming Thursday for our open breeders evening. Breian is the Managing Director and Senior Agronomist with Carroll Consultancy. He was elected the youngest president of Agricultural Consultants Association in 2007. And in 2019, he was appointed to the position of General Secretary of the ACA, acting as Head of Operations. Breian will go through a presentation and answer any questions that attendees might have. Hannah has a number of questions that were sent into the ITBA ahead of the information evening, so we'll also run through those. Hannah, I'm sure we'll mention later, but any questions or queries that we don't get to this evening, there are other opportunities to ask them. You can send them through to the ITBA and we will look to address everything that comes to us. Just before we hear from Breian, we'll hear a short message from Minister Martin Hayden, who sends his apologies as he's not able to be here with us tonight online, but has this message for us. So if Hannah wants to take over there.
Thank you for the opportunity to address this webinar, and apologies that I could not be with you all this evening. It's been really heartening to see such a positive reaction from the sector to the announcement of equine inclusion in the new TAMS scheme. I know it has been a long campaign for many people, including the ITBA, who felt very strongly about the need to support investment by horse breeders. It's a belief that I share. The thoroughbred and sport horse are an intrinsic part of our culture and our heritage. The breeders are at the heart of the industry. which is renowned worldwide and one that I am immensely proud of. Many of these breeders run small operations alongside other agricultural activity, and I absolutely see the need for them to invest in their holdings, particularly in the key areas of housing, training, fencing, and handling. It will lead not only to improved economic viability, but also benefits for the environment and animal welfare. As Minister with responsibility for farm safety, I see the handling of horses in unsuitable facilities as a major risk, one which can and has led to very serious injuries. We are now in the process of operationalising the scheme, and hopefully it will be open for applications very shortly. I know there is a huge appetite and demand from the sector. You only have to look at other sectors that have benefited from TAMS to see the potential it has to drive investment. Over the course of TAMS 2, government invested €390 million in rural Ireland, which really was investment in our rural economy and the rural communities in which all of those recipients were based. The actual scale of that investment is multiples of that figure when you consider that the grant aid is either 40 or 60%. We are now making a further €370 million available over the next 5 years to build on that investment further, helping farmers to make their businesses more viable and future-proofing them for the next generation. And the potential is there now for the equine sector to share similarly in these benefits. That's something I'm very excited about, and I know others in the sector are too. So I want to thank the ITBA again for their constructive engagement and commitment to representing breeders in this wonderful sector. I wish you luck with your webinar, and I look forward to engaging with you all in the time ahead. Thank you.
So thank you there, Una, and for that address from Minister Martin Hayden. Before we jump in, I'd like to say a big thank you to our speaker tonight, Breian Carroll, again for giving your time. And as Una said, we received a number of questions prior to tonight that we'll go through first, and we'll try to answer as many of these as we can. If you do have any questions, you can put them in the chat, which we'll then follow up on, or you can also use the raise a hand icon in the gestures, which we'll be able to pick on. We can unmute your mic then, and you can ask your question. If we don't get to everything tonight, don't worry, we will definitely follow up with all attendees after the event. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you now, Breian.
Thanks, Hannah and Una, and I'm just sharing my screen, Hannah, so you can.
Yeah, that looks perfect.
So you can see it, okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks, thanks, Una, for the introduction, and also to Hannah for the invitation here tonight. And I'm going to bring everybody to the TAMS scheme as it relates to the equine predominantly, but just also an introduction to TAMS in general with you just tonight. Una mentioned 2007. That's actually the time I remember the last time we did stables at home ourselves. So would you believe it's 15 years or so since the equine industry was eligible under TAMS, which is a long time, and a lot of breeders have lost out over that period. So it's very optimistic at the minute now that TAMS has now incorporated equine into the actual program over the next 5 years. So the TAMS is an important element of the CAP strategic plan. And the CAP strategic plan took 3 years to prepare by our department, was lodged with the EU Commission last autumn, early last year, and then approved through our own government last September. And indeed, credit to our own department, Ireland was the first EU member state to have their CAP strategic plan approved. And part of that is the allocation of the funding to TAMS, as Minister Hayden outlined earlier on. For tonight's meeting, I'm going to discuss just an outline of the basic equal scheme, CRIS, all of those areas, because if you're a current farmer submitting your BPS or BIS application, it's important to also understand those elements. They're not compulsory for TAMS, but I just want to refer to them tonight while you're here with me. I'm going to give a background to the TAMS itself and what's likely to happen over the next few years. Then I'll quickly go through all the TAMS schemes that are available, because I'm conscious that many breeders also have other livestock on their farms and may be eligible for other parts of the TAMS. And then we'll bring through, as Una mentioned earlier on, the Animal Welfare Safety Nutrient Storage Scheme. And in fact, that was only launched today. The terms and conditions are only out today. I've had a brief look through them. They seem similar to before. So I haven't got time to read the full 90 pages in the terms and conditions, but I suspect they're very similar to the previous one. Okay, Hannah? Okay, so under BIS of the Eco Scheme, so this is a supplementary payment for those of you that were getting the BPS payment, which is your farm entitlements. You've had to make an annual return every year by the 15th of May to get your BPS entitlements. So all of that has changed in this new CAP strategic plan, and the new buzzword and acronym is BIS, and then you have an Eco Scheme and a CRIS on top of that. So to make it very simple for you, and it's not exactly 100% accurate financially, but if you were getting 10,000 or thereabouts in BPS payments as a farmer last year, more or less 75% of that is set aside for BIS and some CRIS payment, and the other remaining 25% is now made up of an Eco Scheme. And every farmer in Ireland and across all of the EU must select at least 2 Eco Scheme actions to get your farm entitlements. So that may or may not be irrelevant to many of you here, but if you were getting a BPS payment last year, this is how it's going to change from this year on. And the deadline is the 29th of May to submit that BIS application. Again, if you're submitting a BIS application, indeed it's going to be the same for TAMS, you need to be registered as an equine premises with the local DVO, the District Veterinary Office. And that's through a form called the HR1. Many of you have filled that out before. But indeed, there are still some people with equines that don't have that form completed, and you won't be eligible for BIS or TAMS unless you're registered as an equine premises with the local department office. One thing before we get on to TAMS later on is to remember, if you're the person that wants to get the grants in BIS or TAMS, the herd number must be in your name or the equine premises. So if the equine number is in somebody else in the house, but the land and the BIS or the BPS in the past is in somebody else's name or a herd number, then you're going to have to discuss that with someone the likes of me to find out how you're going to become eligible for the TAMS and make sure that on the day you go for the grant that you tick all of those boxes. So as I said earlier, the BIS replaces the BPS. That was the basic payment scheme, is now called BIS. And if you want to get a BIS payment, and indeed it's not the main reason for discussion tonight, but if you want to start getting a BIS payment, or this is the first time you're going to make a BIS application to the Department of Agriculture, you could also consider getting your own entitlements. And your one entitlement is going to be in the region of, depends on what price you buy them at. If you get them from the National Reserve for young farmers or trained people, they're going to be in around €155 per hectare. And the Eco Scheme, if you select 2 environmental actions on top of that, is €65 a hectare. And the CRIS payment is an automatic payment to every farmer in Ireland on the first 30 hectares of in around €43 per hectare. Okay, Hannah? Okay, so if you're going for farm entitlements or any of those other payments, I'm not onto TAMS yet, folks. You need to pass an active farmer test, and that's new in Ireland. It's new in every EU member state in this CAP strategic plan. So if you want to get your entitlements and you were submitting a BPS last year and you want to continue getting your entitlements this year, you must meet a minimum stocking rate on your farm of 0.1 livestock units per hectare. Now keep in mind that equines are 1 livestock unit, so it's relatively low stocking rate, but you still must meet that. And indeed, you can also meet the active farmer test by producing crops like saving hay and silage. And if you were getting entitlements and you didn't have any livestock, indeed, if you had no equines or no cattle or sheep, you can also qualify to get that payment, but you must confirm to the department how are you actively farming that land. And that's a new requirement this year, is called under conditionality. So you will have to produce a receipt or upload it onto the system before you get paid your BIS entitlements, where you employed someone to cut the hay or silage or got someone to trim your hedges on your farm, that there's some actual expense for you of being an active farmer. And this is only related to BIS, remember, not the equine TAMS just yet. If you don't pass that active test there, that second last comment, you don't get any payments. So it is a very easy one to meet, and I would imagine that most farmers will be able to meet that active farmer test in some degree this year. And then the last one there is the eligibility for TAMS 3 is different than BIS and the ANC, and I'm going to move on to that now in the next slide, Hannah, please. Second last slide before moving on to TAMS, sorry. Horses, remember, are not automatically eligible for the stocking rate in BIS or indeed the ANC. So what's the ANC? That's the area of natural constraint that replaced the disadvantaged area payment. And some of you probably here are getting that, where you submit your passports to the Department of Agriculture to prove you have the stock to get the ANC. If you want to get your BIS or ANC, you can make up that stocking rate with your horses again this year. But under BIS and ANC only, you're going to have to prove that you are an equine breeder. It's not eligible to those of you that are into store horses or buying young stock. You must have a foal produced on your farm in 2001 or 2002. And this is only, remember, for BIS and ANC. However, if you meet that minimum stocking rate or that criteria of having a foal in either of those 2 years, other horses then can make up your stocking rate on the farm. Remember, donkeys still are eligible, but only half of your stocking rate can be made up of donkeys. They're also classified as equines with the Department of Agriculture. Okay, Hannah? So moving on to TAMS, the main discussion for tonight. So as the Minister outlined there was over 391 million was spent in TAMS up to the end of 2022. And that is a huge injection of funding into rural areas. If you are doing any building or construction work, you're going to be employing local people and you're going to be buying off local merchants or wholesalers. So it's a huge injection of funding into the economy. And the great news is that our department have again secured funding for TAMS over the next few years, up until the end of 2027. I remember when our last economic decline after the recession, there was no TAMS or no structural grant aids for farmers, including equines or cattle or sheep, for a number of years until the new cap came back in 2015. So it's a great success for our local economy, indeed for the equine stakeholders and indeed everybody else in the advisory on our side and farm bodies, that the TAMS is now secure over the next number of years. TAMS 3 did officially open in February, a couple of weeks ago, but the Animal Welfare Nutrient and Storage Scheme that a lot of you will fall under in TAMS only opened today. The deadline is the 16th of June. So if I'm applying for horse stables today for someone or tomorrow morning, whether I apply tomorrow morning or midnight of the 16th of June, just because I applied for you today, you have no preference over the person that I submit on the 15th or 16th of June. What happens is that this is called a tranche. And when the tranche closes, all applications in this particular tranche are assessed. Now, in the last few years, we've been very fortunate in the farming community that the selection process for TAMS was only used once in recent years. But if there is an oversubscription of applicants in any particular scheme, the department have it within their powers to use a selection criteria. And again, the positives is it hasn't been used in recent years, bar one tranche. So it's unlikely to happen in this tranche either, which means that everybody that applies is likely to get approved once it's a valid application, subject to funding being allocated for that particular scheme. Remember, the great news under TAMS is that there's a young farmer scheme still there. I'll talk to you about that later. There's a new women's farmers grant, and also anybody in organic farming. All of those three categories in TAMS now acquire 60% grant aid, which is a huge positive for anybody that's involved in those three particular areas. As I said, they will run in 3-month tranches. So it's expected that TAMS will reopen 1 minute past the 16th of June and the 17th of June, and will stay open for likely another 3 months up until September or October. And then that's the next tranche and continue each year thereafter. The minimum amount of eligible investment, again, is around 2,000, and that's expected to be the same. I haven't had time to look at that, but we expect it to be the exact same, which means if you're applying for something as simple as a horse stock and it comes under 2,000, The application online when I'm applying will not be valid unless you spend a minimum of 2,000 in TAMS. So you can put in other items, and when you get approved, you'll only get paid then on the items that you actually fulfill. So if you're only after a horse stock only in TAMS, you can put in a few other items, get it over 2,000 minimum. When the approval letter comes out and you submit your receipts for payment, you will get paid in whatever you lodge then to the Department for Grant Aid. Okay, Hannah? So before I move on to equine, just for those of you, and there are the majority of breeders in Ireland do have some other farm and enterprise. So these are just a typical example of what was funded in TAMS in the last since 2015, the last 7 years. The traditional starter houses and sheds, milk and parlours with cubicles, the outstore perma stores for slurry, scrapers and cubicles, and straw bed and loose houses. Okay, Hannah? And indeed, again, other items of interest to you is mobile equipment for cattle and sheep. All of those items were available, weighing scales and crushes and yards, and then calving gates for health and safety, and Minister Hayden mentioned safety earlier. So all of those items again were there in the past and are all there again in the current TAMS. Okay, Hannah? So now there are 10 schemes within the TAMS started since today and going forward. And the one thing I'd like to advise is that the department have committed that all of these schemes will be available by the 16th of June. Some of these items that fall under each of these categories are not expected to be ready by May. So if I'm applying for a farmer, I won't be able to apply because it's not on the system. And the reason for that is the department are currently designing and finishing the specification and the terms and conditions for some of these new items that are going to be in the TAMS scheme. But they have guaranteed that every new item will be available before the current deadline of the 16th of June. So under the AWNSS, as we referred to earlier, equine is now included. If you're an individual farmer, you can get grant aid of 40% up to an investment of 90,000 on your farm. For those that are in tillage, there's a separate tillage grant. The dairy equipment scheme is still there. The Young Farmer Capital Investment Scheme, which may be of interest to some of you here, where you have a young farmer on the herd number, and I go through the conditions in a few slides further, and they get 20% extra. So a young farmer on the equine number or herd number or flock number, indeed for sheep, will get 60% of the first 90,000 investment on the farm. Again, the Women Farmer Capital Investment Scheme, we have no terms and conditions to this yet, but what we're being told and reading between the lines is, again, it's new and will include equine investments. So those of you that have an equine premises and were registered last year and did submit a BPS application to the department declaring your land, or do it this year, will be eligible for 60% again up to the first 90,000 investment. There's unlikely to be any of you here involved in organic farming, but again, in organic farming, it's 60% again on the first 90,000 investment. Minister Hayden referred to a new farm safety capital investment scheme. This was part of the top one at number one, the AWNSS in the past. It's now been given its own grant and ceiling, and with a clear focus on farm safety issues. The solar investment scheme again is 60% again on 90,000, and the low emission slurry equipment scheme again is 60% on the first 40,000 investment that should be there, sorry. And the pig and poultry for those sectors is also a grant aid up to $500,000. So very positive. It covers the majority of every Irish farmer and every enterprise, and it's just a matter of deciding which of those suits you. And predominantly most of you here will either be going for the first one at number one under the AWNSS if you're established farmer over 40 years of age, and you'll be able to get your equine grant in that. If you're a young farmer under 40 years of age, perhaps you'll fall in for 60%, And then if you're a woman on an equine number with a herd number or equine premises number, and again, you'll be eligible for 60% under the new TAMS. Okay, Hannah? And again, just to have some photographic evidence, these are all the new items that are available in this TAMS. The solar fencing, solar pumps for water out of streams, and the basis of a lot of these new ideas is to protect the environment, engage with other methods of sustainable farming, and also look at other energy sources. So again, I've put up photographs there of your stables are back and eligible under TAMS, your horse walker, and your gallops and your lunging area, and also fencing on the left hand side. Again, there's different elements of fencing which I'll show after a while, but all of these items are now new. And you'll see the solar panel, on the middle shed there. These are all new items in this current TAMS. Okay, Hannah? So I'm conscious that some of you have never heard of TAMS or engaged in the system before. And out there at the outside, there are a lot of boxes to be ticked. But I was telling Una and Hannah earlier that my own firm is 7 years dealing with TAMS, and even before that, back in 2007 and 8, I've always had an interest in farm buildings and design and all of that. And there are a lot of areas within the TAMS that you need to understand, and what boxes you need to take before you can be eligible, first of all, and then how do you get your payment. So a new condition that came in 2015 is that all items that you go for structurally do need planning permission or exemption from planning. And that does include your horse training facilities, and whether there's a roof or no roof on it. I've looked at the terms and conditions today, and they're down as requiring planning permission or exemption from it. I'll discuss that with you later on, or answer any questions on that. All applications, unlike when I started back in my own career, the applications were by post and filled out by hand. Every application for TAMS is now online through the Ag Food system. Again, if you're looking for facilities like horse stables, remember you're now storing animals inside predominantly over the winter period. There will be waste to discuss there, farm manure, and that needs to comply with the nitrates regulations and must be stored according to that. So if I was going out to discuss the design of new stables with you, the first question was automatically asked you is, have you any facilities currently to store that farm manure? If not, you need to seriously consider building a facility and getting a grant aid also for that, and cover you under normal cross-compliance regulations that are there under the Department of Environment and also through the Department of Agriculture. Again, unlikely for yourselves, but if we are submitting some element of a tank, I know we put one up years ago at stables, the amount of runoff is minimum, but you still require some element of a tank, and there's an Excel costings to be completed and uploaded with your grant when we're applying for that. And again, a full list of investments and sub-investments must be put in, so it's just not a matter of applying and just sticking in horse walker. There's elements to that, the mechanical devices, the sizes, the radius, the widths. So all of that must be explained clearly on the online application when you're submitting to the department. And the last one there is, if you get a letter of approval on the 1st of August this year, you have 12 months to complete your facilities or grant-aided investments, and you can seek an extension. But again, if it's a structural investment, the department will look for some photographic evidence that you can prove you have started the project, but that you've run into some troubled water with perhaps a contractor just too busy, weather permitting you aren't able to finish it, whatever the mitigation factors are, and you'll get an extra 6 months if you require an extension, but it must be with photographic evidence and just can't simply be a green field picture and sent into the department. It must be started. Okay, Hannah? So again, in relation to planning permission, when I, back in 2007, back at the farm investment schemes, or the old farm waste management schemes back then, I was entitled to certify whether it was required planning or it was exempt from planning. I no longer am allowed to do that, or either is anybody else here. You must have a letter from the local authority if you are exempt. and that must go with your application, or else you require planning permission. So in most cases, we're building horse stables or facilities with a roof. If you go over these limits here of 200 square meters, you're pushing yourself into planning permission. And again, if you're adding to an existing yard and the entire roof space under class 6 under the planning regulations exceeds 300 square meters, you automatically fall into planning permission. If we were foolish enough to apply for a grant under TAMS without those items, your application will be rejected. So it won't be, it wouldn't be very prudent for me to be advising that. But that discussion will happen when the likes of me or your own advisor, a private consultant through ACA or Teagasc comes out and looks at the yards with you. They'll be all measured. The decision can be made then whether you require planning or not, or exemption for planning. So no longer can any one of us exempt the facility from planning. That must be done with a letter from the local authority. And that does require, if you are the local authority, and we deal with many local authorities in the country with their own business in submitting plan permissions, they will require drawings. They'll want to know exactly what you're building, where you're going to put it. So it will require a site layout and detailed drawings. And if you're producing waste on the farm, like farm manure, the local authority will ask, where is that going to be spread? How does it affect your overall farm? And secondly, have you enough land to put the farm manure on? If you're a traditional horse enterprise with very little land, you may have to have an agreement with a neighbour or somebody else to prove that the farm manure is going onto some land in that case. Okay, Hannah? So under class 10 here is that this is under the regulations for planning. You'll see that the erection of an unroofed fenced area for the exercising of training of horses or ponies, together with a drainage bed or soft surface material to provide an all-weather surface. So again, there's some conditions there. Can't exceed 2 meters in height, can't be closer than 10 meters to the road, and it can involve staging of public events. But regardless, even though that might be exemption, the TAMS rules state that the local authority must be the people to exempt you as an applicant for that structure. Okay, Hannah? So if we apply for, you apply through your own advisor for an application, you get approved, you finish the project. This is what happens when it comes to payments. So all the receipts, and this is an important message here, that all the receipts, everything must match the applicant. So you cannot send in cash receipts. There must be in the applicant's name, address, matching whatever the application was. So if it's the name of the equine premises, all the receipts must match that. It cannot be in a brother or sister's name or somebody else. And again, they must be marked paid. And again, if there was VAT applicable, it must show the net amount of VAT and also the total payment on each individual invoice. Again, as part of our service and any other advisor you're dealing with, perhaps in doing TAMS, we don't submit any application for payment until all of these boxes are ticked, because otherwise your payment will be withheld or held up, and that's only going to cause a delay in issuing payment to you. If you build a structure, so for argument's sake, horse stables, you must prove ownership of that land, that you had the right to build it on that. That must be uploaded at payment stage. If you're in land on a long-term lease, you must also produce that lease at payment stage. So again, it cannot be on land that's not on your name. It must be in the partner's name that's on the equine premises or the entity. Some farmers trade as companies or in joint names with other people. Once that box is ticked that one of those partners own the land where the site has been built, you can then qualify to get your payment. These are issues will be discussed before you ever apply with whoever's doing the work for you. A new thing this year is every sub-investment under TAMS must now be supported by an Agri-Snap GPS-linked photograph. So which means if you build a horse stables and I'm doing the job for you, either you as the applicant or I must download an app from the Department of Agriculture and submit proof. This is a GPS linked app, so the department can link it to that particular spot and that it links to where you said you were going to build the premises. Also, if you're over 40 years of age or you have a certificate in farming, that's the green cert as we call it, for more than 5 years, you must complete a half-day cert in health and safety of farming. And again, Minister Hayden is very strong on this. And indeed, anybody across the country through Teagasc or through the ACA Network run these courses. So you must fulfill that, and that cert must also be uploaded at payment stage. Okay, Hannah? Again, if you're building a structure or doing any electrical work like in a horse walker and it requires an electrical cert, again, you're going to have to engage with an electrician, whereas electrical work, and there are certificates required in that case. So it's unlikely for the people here tonight will need a slat cert, but you may require electrical cert. You will if you're doing horse stables. And then for concrete, if you're pouring concrete walls or using concrete, they must be certified, meet the department specification, and the person or wholesaler that you bought those off would provide the certs for you to prove that that concrete was in line with the department spec. Again, you must have a neat tax clearance cert, and we'll help you with that when it comes to payment. Your accountant will get it for you, or yourself. So if you're getting a grant in excess of €650, which is probably going to be the majority of grant applications, you need a neat tax cert or tax clearance cert. And where you engage with a contractor and you're paying them more than €650, you also will require their e-cert certificate, and that must also be part of the TAMS payment process. Okay, Hannah? Again, about 7 or 8 more slides, folks. I'll quickly go through them. So how is your grant paid in terms of money into your pocket? So when you apply online for the grant, it automatically calculates the reference costs. If you want to go in a little bit lower than that, so for argument's sake, if your build is costing 20,000 and you were foolish enough to say you're going to do it for 18,000 and you submit it, you'll get paid your grant on 18,000 because it's lower than the reference cost. If your marked invoices that you submit come in at 15,000 and the reference cost was 20, you'll only get paid on the 15,000, so the lower figure again. Or else the final one, the cost of investment proposed by the applicant. So if you put in 18,000 instead of 20, you'll get paid your grant on the 18,000. But remember, if your receipts plus your own labour, which you're allowed to put in so much per hour, exceeds 20,000, and the stables using the reference costs was 20,000, and the reference cost in your labour comes to 25,000, you'll still only get 60% or 40% of the 20,000, which is the department reference costs. And that indeed has been a big issue for farmers across all sectors the last few years, with increased costs. The department have increased their costs twice the last 18 years, I think it is, but they may not still reflect the market rate. So unfortunately, that extra payment over and above the reference cost is going to come 100% out of your pocket. Okay, Hannah? In relation to the Young Farmer Scheme, and I always like to inform people about this because there may be ways in your home to discuss getting a young farmer involved. And again, it's under the Young Farmers Capital Investment Scheme. Again, you'll get 60%. So, if you're putting up a nice facility costing 40,000, 20% of that is 8,000 extra in grant aid. So it's seriously worth considering if you're going down that route. If you add a young trained person to your herd number or equine premises, and it now becomes a joint herd premises. So I'll give you an example. If the equine is in my name and the owner is under 40 and has the certificate in farming, and I add her to my equine number, that's classified as a joint herd number. That does not qualify for 40%. You'll only get access to the Young Farmer Scheme if I come off that herd number or equine number and transfer to Una, and Una as individual applies, or else a registered farm partnership, which there are about 3,000 in Ireland, where the young person or more than two people come together, more than one, come together to form a registered farm partnership. Again, remember that under the low investment, low emission slurry spreading, again, maybe not relevant to many of you here, under the solar scheme, they're separate funding. So if all you want here, folks, is plenty of money, because you'll get 40 or 60% under the AWNSS. If you want to go off and spend another 90,000 on solar, you'll get another grant on that 90. And if you required a slurry spreading for another enterprise you have, like cattle or whatever else, you'll get grant aid then on that and a separate grant under TAMS. So very attractive. In the past, the 90,000 used to be your allowance, and the only one outside of that was the low emission slurry spreading, and came off your 90,000 every time you spend some money over the 5 years. Again, in a registered farm partnership, and again, there's about 3,000 plus in Ireland. So what happens with a registered farm partnership won't be relevant for many equine people, because I don't envisage many of you spending over 90,000. But if you did and you're in a registered farm partnership, the first 90,000 can be paid at 60% because there's a young farmer or a woman involved in the actual number, equine or herd number, and the balance up to 160,000 spent in that farm then can be 40% for the other partner that's in that entity. Okay, Hannah? Again, for a young trained farmer, what are the conditions? So if you have an equine number and you want to get access to 60%, you must be set up with the department for the first time in your life within the last 5 years. You must not be more than 40 years of age. So it's a little bit of a tongue twister there, because it actually means you can't be more than 41 this year, so that your 41 birthday is not in 2023, then you'll be eligible. So not more than 40 years. So if you're on the 31st of December, 40 years and 360 days, you're eligible. Own or lease the facility or the land, where the facility is being constructed, like I said earlier. Again, a condition of TAMS for all of you as equine, you must submit at least 5 hectares of land on a BPS application either last year, or you are now permitted to submit it on BIS now. It's open till the 29th of May. But it is a condition of getting the equine grant that you must put in at least 5 hectares of land either owned or leased on a BIS application this year before the 29th of May. If you have traditionally submitted a BPS application and have had more than 5 hectares on it, you're eligible and you're fine. In TAMS 2, and I just hadn't time to consult Hannah or Una the conditions just late this evening, but in the old TAMS 2, and I expect it will be the same here, is it's the only allowance within the department is if you've signed up to the Green Cert or certain farming, you'll get 40% in your grant aid now, but if you submit the certificate for farming to the department within 3 years of the project, the letter of approval, you then will get the additional 20% for your grant aid in that case. And the last one is some cases, if there's a registered farm partnership, may not be relevant for many of you here, there must be a long-term control for that young farmer in the partnership. They must have a minimum 20% profits out of the farm. There are 2 legal documents in a registered farm partnership, and they must exercise financial and management control in the running of your either equine premises or herd number. Okay, Hannah? So for those of you that are over 40 years of age and have been farming and have an equine facility, that part under the Animal Welfare Safety and Nutrient Storage open today and will remain in place until the 16th of June. You must have an equine number, so it's not just sufficient to have a herd number. If you have horses, you must have the equine number. You must have a minimum of 3 equines, and you must have completed the equine census. Now, the department have clarified if you forgot to submit your census for last year, it can still be completed. And again, once you're showing more than 3 horses or equines on that, then you'll qualify for TAMS. Again, if you've submitted a BPS in the past, you're fine. If you haven't, you must declare your land on at least 5 hectares on a BIS application before the 29th of May, before you're eligible for TAMS. And one last important point, particularly for equine people, is that if you have a farmyard that's on a small piece of ground, maybe half an acre somewhere else away from the land block, it is most important that that farmyard is also declared on your BIS application by the 29th of May. Because if you go for an investment and either yourself or we have to take an AgriSnap photograph, it must be linked to the parcel number the department give you for that farmyard. They will not be able to link it to that farmyard if you don't put a map in of that farm before the 29th of May. Okay, Hannah? So most of you are probably familiar with this, and Una and Hannah have probably informed you about these. So under equine housing, all of those items are there, your housing facilities for equines. Under equine training facilities, you have your gallops, your lunge rings, your outdoor exercise area, you have your walkers with a roof or without a roof, and then equine fencing, post and rail, horse tape and rope, specialized horse mesh fencing, and also the gateway. Next one, Hannah, please. And then these are the reference costs. So again, as I said earlier, if I was applying for one of you here and you were going for one of these items, these are the reference costs. And then there will be some sub-investments under these items when you're applying online. And then all of the documentation for planning or drawings, if they're going for structures, maps for fencing, all of that must be uploaded at application stage. So I'll give you a typical example there. So your post and rail fence there under equine fencing comes in at a department reference cost of €20.90 per metre. Now, if the contractor's cost is charging you €25 per metre, you will still only get your grant on €20.90, not on the higher figure. So you will not get larger than the actual reference costs here. So again, I won't go into them in much detail. They're fixed and they're in place at the minute. So if you apply over the next few weeks, there'll be the rates. Okay, Hannah? So to give you a typical example here of an American barn, and just we did this in our own office, a 24 metre by 12 metre, that typical design, both sides, a central passageway. So it's roughly 78 foot by 39 foot. So using the department's reference cost currently today on that facility, that would cost, based on the department's reference costs, €81,475.20. If you're a young trained farmer, you'll get almost 49,000, that's 60% towards that. And if you're under the animal welfare grant, over 40 years of age, you'll get 40%. But again, if you're a woman farmer, you'll also get the 60%, the same as the young trained farmer. So quite considerable difference in the young trained farmer there, or the woman farmer, versus someone that's over 40 years of age. So about 16 or 17,000. So that's how it's costed. And when you're applying for your claim for your grant aid, all your receipts and your loan labour must exceed the top line there of 81,475. Okay, Hannah? Last two slides. Typical example here for 20 by 40 metre exercise area. So again, using that, the department reference cost is just shy of 32,000. If it's a young trained farmer, or indeed a woman farmer that's eligible, it's just over 19,000 in grant aid. And again, for most of you here tonight, that'll probably fall in under 40%, which will just come over 12,000. And then horse walkers with a roof, if we'll assume a 15 metre radius. Again, the department costings for that typical facility is around 38,000. And again, there's the two items below. And those particular areas, including the horse walker, it includes that grant aid there, includes the mechanical devices, electrical works, all of that. The only extras in terms of the stables and all that is that the tack room and actually the fodder storage area is costed a little bit different than the actual animal area. And that's part of the application when you're submitting it for payment. Okay, Hannah, we're nearly there, Una. Last one really is, so again, if you engage with the ACA Network, and most people don't realize, so we have about 210 members working out of 160 member offices across the country. We're the private advisory sector, and we advise in the region of 55,000 farmers in Ireland. Teagasc advise 43,000. And the department's own figures, every TAMS the last 7 years, 70% of all applications are coming from the private advisory service. And again, there are a number of specialised ACA members out there that can complete the full package for you, from design, deal with your planning, application to TAMS, and make sure that your payment hits your bank account. And again, all of our members are registered farm advisory system, approved advisors with the Department of Agriculture. Our new website was launched last week. Our members area is undergoing a brand new reform also, and it's likely that all members will be up there by later this week or early next week if you want to try and find someone to help you in your own area. Okay, that's it, Hannah and Una, sorry, and I've got to the end. So a quick run through, there's a lot of information there, folks, so sorry. I've tried to make it as simple and as interesting as possible. And Hannah, I'll hand it back to you, so thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much, Breian. I'm like, there's so much there, and I'm sure people will get plenty of information from it. We'll probably jump into the questions now. As I said, we got a few sent in previously, so we might be able to fly through them. And I think a good few of them have already previously been answered kind of throughout that presentation. Okay. So the first one that came in is a TAMS grant specifically for a thoroughbred-based system, or is it open to the likes of native breeds or Irish sport horse Connemara?
Straight answer is yes. Every equine person is eligible.
Excellent. And then, does this scheme cover rubber flooring in racing stables?
No. So, and it didn't in the other TAMS either. Even if you're a cattle farmer looking for mats for your facilities, for slats or anything like that, you don't get a grant for it, but there's actually nothing stopping you putting mats in yourself at your own expense, and that's all fine, but you won't get a grant for it.
Perfect. The next one then, as a lot of breeders may already have horse walkers installed, yes. The attendee was wondering, is the mechanical part of horse walkers, would they be covered under TAMS 3?
No, so the basis for most of TAMS over the last 7 years, and again this one, is that in the majority it's for new equipment, new structures, and where you're retrofitting to an existing facility is generally not acceptable, and it's not in this case either. But notwithstanding that, Hannah, if you build a new one, that new item of equipment is costed in the walker for the new grant.
Yeah. Possibly not one for tonight, but if someone wanted a practical demonstration of filling out a form, is that something they could go to the ACA for to get a little help, or is it something as you go through maybe a step-by-step process? Yeah, look, so there are plenty of people that can help. I'd probably be giving away my intellectual property by doing that. But at the same time, look, no problem, I help people where they can. But what I would say there, Hannah, is a lot of advisors have stopped doing TAMS because it has become a bureaucratic, not been negative, it has become a huge administrative burden. So it's important that you engage with people that have, I would say, a history or an experience in doing it. I've taken on people that have done it themselves, and some people have been successful, and indeed I've taken on applications that were submitted incorrectly. So like if you're going by strict deadlines and you're a young trained farmer and you get one opportunity in this TAMS because you're turning 41 in July and your application is rejected, you won't have a second chance. So look, I would say by all means, of course you can do it and try it yourself, but it's probably prudent to engage with somebody else to help you. Yeah, probably a tricky process as well to do everything. I think we've covered it a little bit, but possibly briefly bullet pointed, what documentation is required to claim for the purchase and installation of a horse stock? Yeah, so that's only out today, Hannah. So there is a specification, I think off the top of my head, it's SI 1 or 156. So it'll depend, the costings is likely, now it's not active on our system, but it's likely to be based on length or size. Okay, now there may be a standard cost either, I can update you on that. But again, as I said earlier, the horse stock on its own is unlikely to meet the minimum investment of €2,000. So you'd probably throw in one or two other items if it's only the stock you're after. And then when it comes to claiming, you'll upload the cert. But if it's, I would imagine it's going to be something like the scales in cattle farming and everything else, where you'll have to produce a manufacturer's receipt to match it, Hannah. Yeah, I think that kind of covers our next question is, does the stock have to meet certain specifications? And I suppose that comes under maybe size. So again, as that comes out, look, it's out today. I'll have a look on that, and you can share with members. Perfect. Yeah. Do you have to be fully registered with the department on their system? And what would maybe someone do who didn't have a farm advisor?
Yeah, so there's nothing against stopping you from doing that. And the eligibility clause will be, you must be registered as an equine premises, first of all. And you must have submitted a census with at least 3 horses on it. So even if you didn't do it at Christmas or before the end of the year, you still have time to do it. It will be accepted. And don't forget, you also have the condition that many of you mightn't have done in the past, is you must declare that 5 hectares of land on a BPS in the past or a BIS from this year. They're the 3 main criteria.
Perfect. Then the next question is, when inspectors go on site, will they look at everything or just the one item on the grant?
Yeah, so that's a good question, very fair, and even all other farmers ask us that. So they're predominantly coming out to inspect you for the TAMS application. So I should have mentioned that there are about 5% of farmers are investigated before the grant is paid. And we've had some major jobs and small jobs investigated. So if you get a prepayment audit, and I'll come back and answer your question, Hannah, in a second, but if you get a prepayment audit before the payment is issued to you, they will come out and visit your farm. Obviously, if you built horse stables, they'll look to see that they're there and that they're meeting the specification. But if you made 10 individual payments through your bank account for that facility, the department will seek to look at your bank statements and that the 10 invoices that you submitted for that facility match your bank statements. Okay, so it will all have to be cross-checked. There have been cases where farmers got other individuals to help them by paying some of the invoices due for TAMS, and their grants were rejected. So even if someone financially helps you, the money must go through your bank account and it must be paid by the farmer that applied for the grant. Now you're entitled to block off everything else on your bank statements, but if you issued 6 check payments to 6 different individuals to build your horse stables and you get a prepayment audit, they must be able to see on your bank statement those 6 payments that match the invoices, and they must match financially exactly the figure. And that's the kind of prepayment scrutiny that can happen. That's the first thing, Hannah. They will also look at your facilities, that if you got grant aid for, we say an 8-bay double, I'm just using an example of horse stables, and they find a 6-bay double, and you submitted for 8 bays, well, that's technically fraud, and you didn't apply for what you should have applied for. So all those sorts of things are important, probably in that case, to have someone to help you. They do also look if there's obvious issues in the farmyard in terms of pollution or cross compliance. No department inspector will ignore it, and they also are obliged to cross report that to the local authority. So you can expect the inspection to be predominantly about TAMS, but look, if any of the rest of us were going out doing an inspection, you'd be throwing your eye around the same place at the same time, make sure that everything's in order.
That's perfect. The next question in, so I think this might be from a possible young farmer. They've said that with planning permission takes roughly 12 weeks, and given that specs on equine buildings are not updated, he's worried that this may delay the planning application. This means that he may still be waiting on the planning permission before the application window closes. And he was wondering if their allowances would be made because the time frame is so tight. And it's also coming to the point to is 5 years as a young farmer may expire before he gets the planning.
Yeah, look, we have other farmers in our own firm involved in this. The bad news is you're not going to be eligible. We've asked that. So if your time runs out, unfortunately, there's nothing you can do about it. You will automatically qualify for 40%, but you're not going to get to 60%. And there's no allowance for that. You cannot click the submit button when the application is ready to go in unless you have plan and permission received. That's full and final plan and permission, and that's after 28 days. So the bad news, unfortunately, for that person is no.
So we have a couple of questions coming in online on the chat. So thank you for everyone for those. We're still going to go through a few of what we had. Is the grant funding subject to tax?
Yeah, so it's all treated as income. So it'll be capital expenditure, okay? So it's not treated as income. So you'll be, most cases, you're probably getting a loan, And I know all the typical farmers we've dealt with, predominantly in all sectors, they'll probably get a bridging loan. So for argument's sake, if the investment going to cost 80,000, your banking institution may fund you the 80,000 to get a bridging loan. If you want banking support, they look for a copy of the planning permission and also your TAMS approval. So if you're getting, I'm going to make it simple here, 50,000 of a grant, you'll have a balance in payment of 30,000. So that 30,000 then is offset as a capital expenditure over how many years you wish, up to 7 years, right? So it's not, it cannot be written off in 1 year. It's treated as capital expenditure, whatever the net cost of that facility to you. And sorry, I forgot to say, Hannah, all my figures I showed earlier are net of VAT. So those figures are plus VAT. So as a registered farmer, there is an allowance in tax that a farmer is eligible to get a VAT rebate on construction facilities and eligible items that we talked about in TAMS. But you will have to pay the VAT during construction, and you'll have to submit those invoices to the revenue to get the VAT rebate, and you'll be using the same invoice to submit to the department to claim your grant. And one other item, Hannah, before I leave the planning part. If I went out to a farm tomorrow and somebody wanted to put up facilities, I would, even now it's only coming into end of March, early February, it's highly unlikely you'll have these stables up by next winter, because that person has touched on it. If we got out tomorrow and we had provisionally decided a design and ready to go in the next 2 to 3 weeks, a minimum of 12 weeks, that person said. If there's further information, which has happened more often now with local authorities, you're given 6 months to answer that further information. If we can get it in within a few weeks, they still have a few weeks to give a decision. You could already be into August or September perhaps, or maybe be optimistic June or July. But if you miss the 16th of July deadline, you're going to fall into the next tranche, which is likely not to close until October, and you won't be assessed then in that tranche until November, December, or maybe early next January. So already we've been out with farmers in January for certain designs and facilities for farms and telling them it's going to be a very, very tough push to get that facility up by next Christmas.
Yeah. So folks, we probably have a little bit more time for a few questions. Now, there are a few that haven't been answered, so don't worry, we will have time to come back to them and everyone will be answered afterwards. Scroll down to the next one here. So I think it has been answered, but do you have to be in receipt of a BIS or basic farm scheme payment, or do you just need to be registered on the system with the department?
So good point, Hannah. You don't have to be. The BIS is an eligibility requirement, the BIS application, but you don't have to be in receipt of a BIS payment to be eligible for TAMS. It's entirely different. But if someone here tonight is submitting for the first time 10 or 15 or 20 hectares of land that they've never put in before, you should talk to me or the equivalent to me to inquire about even leasing in BIS entitlements for this year and getting paid on them and getting some income out of entitlements. It's entirely different to TAMS. But farmers can avail of that entitlement payment if they want by talking to someone that has entitlements to lease. You can also buy the entitlements and you'll get paid on them in the next 5 years. So it's worth considering that if you have the land.
And then possibly not a tricky enough question, but how would it work for a family? So if the husband has the herd number, the wife has the equine premise number, and the son has the green cert, can you apply jointly, or can one person apply?
Well, that's where I suppose have to earn my stripes trying to figure out that one. But the main important thing is that the applicant for the equine grant must be the person that gets the claim. There must be the people that's using it. So we could alter those entities there by seeing, can we get, you can switch people on premises, that's fine. You just have to reapply. You can do that. Get the young trained farmer perhaps onto the equine number, or get the woman onto the equine number. It's just a matter of making sure that when you submit for the TAMS and you're trying to get 60%, that's the entity that is going to be continuing farming in and also gets the grant payment. And the other thing that I didn't refer to earlier is that if you get a horse or equine grant, it is a condition of TAMS that you remain an equine farmer for 5 years. So if you decide to stop equine farming in 3 years' time and the department see that you didn't fulfill your 5 years, they can seek to recoup your grant. It's a condition of getting a grant in TAMS, you must continue farming for 5 years.
And then another question here. So in relation to a sand arena and a lunge arena, do you have to require planning permission from local authorities in order to build? And the same in relation to adding a walker, is planning permission required?
Yeah, they're saying as of today, yes, Hannah, that's down on it, that planning is needed, or exemption for planning. So again, we would probably consider seriously their exemption for planning. That means you make a private application to the local authority without having to put a notice on the paper or at the entrance to your site. You apply as a private individual, and where we help people there is the local authorities still need the design of the site layout, where it's going to be positioned. You make an application to local authorities seek an exemption on this facility. So some of those you mentioned there may be eligible for exemption rather than having to go down the full planning route. And if you're fortunate enough and the local authority give you a speedy reply, you could expect to get a response within 4 to 6 weeks that you're exempt from planning in that case. But every local authority differs, unfortunately, Hannah. There's no fixed rules across the board. The classes are there, all right, but some local authorities interpret the rules different than others.
Yeah, so it'll probably depend on each. Another question here is, will equestrian centres be able to avail of the solar grant up to 90,000?
Well, again, if they meet the eligibility criteria that I've said earlier, submitting all of those items and ticking those boxes, you can get the solar energy grant separate to the other TAMS for horse stables or anything else on a separate 90,000 ceiling. Now, the one thing to be aware of under the solar is that if it's a farm enterprise, you cannot get grant aid for more solar than the farm requires, right? There's a thing called a slippage or a slight surplus can go back into the grid if you can do that. But if you're only using €500 worth of electricity a month over the full year, like you're unlikely, without me knowing your circumstances, get grant aid for €90,000 worth of solar because you won't be allowed to put that slippage out into the grid. This is predominantly to help farmers in their own electricity supply initially. And the other item to that is, which is a new good allowance, is your dwelling house can be part of this and attached to the horse stables if you have solar on it. In the previous solar grants, you couldn't connect the dwelling. That's now removed, so the advantage is your dwelling can be part of it.
Then another question here is, if you are a dry stock farmer and also have an equine under a different company, but the equine number is the same as the herd number, can you apply in the farm enterprise up to 90,000 and have a separate application under the equine enterprise up to 90,000?
No, so I just missed the first part, Hannah. Just read again, please.
Yeah, so if you are a dry stock farmer and also have an equine under a different company, but the equine number is the same as the herd number.
Yeah, okay, yes, fine. Yeah, so it sounds like to me is so generally the individual is 90,000. Okay, I could probably help that person if I knew a bit more about it, but generally, if you have if there's an interconnection between the equine and the herd with the same person, in the past at least anyway, the 90,000 ceiling was for that individual. But if I'm interpreting that right there, Hannah, now.
Yeah. I think if the person who asked the question, if we want to follow up on that after the talk as well, more than welcome to. We might have time for just one or two more. Can a company apply to TAMS?
Yes, it can, no problem.
Is it a problem?
Sorry, Hannah, again. So when we say company, remember again though that the equine number, herd number must the company must trade as something on the Department of Agriculture system. So if your equine premises is Hannah Marks, but you're trading as Marks Company Limited, and that's not registered with the department, that's where the matching up and cross checking must happen at the initial stages. It must be linked.
Then is it a problem if your equines are owned by your company, but you own the land?
You own the land, but the equine's owned by the company. Yes. So, okay. So the passports in that case are in the company name. Is that right? Yeah, that's what it sounds like. Yeah, and the equine premises has the land. So if they, yeah. So again, that's from the initial understanding there. That's not matching up. If you apply as the individual through BIS, and you submit passports, well, you won't have to submit passports for TAMS, but you have to have the 3 horses minimum. So it depends on the census. If the census is going in the individual's name, but the company owns the horses, so again, they don't seem to me matching up there. You need to just check that one.
Mm-hmm. Then, as a trained female farmer, sub 40 years of age, that's been farming for more than 5 years, are they eligible for 40 or 60%?
On that, my understanding is 60%. Yeah. It's the young farm scheme that you're prevented from the 5 years.
And then we might just take one more question. If the equine premises number is in your name, but the land is in someone else's name, and he has a dairy farm, can you apply for planning on his land, or does the land have to be in the applicant's name, or is a family member acceptable?
Okay, just give me a second, Hannah, to reread that, please. Equine premises number is in. So if you're submitting a BIS application, remember the 5 hectares there of land that goes in the BIS must be in the equine person's management, put it that way. So if horses are on land that's in the uncle's name at the minute, and your uncle is submitting that land on the BIS or BPS last year, you'll have to take that land off your uncle and put it in your own application this year, right? So you must be in control of that farm then, that 5 hectares. So if you have an inspection in that case and your uncle is farming it for the full calendar year, you could have difficulties with cross compliance there because you're not really farming that land. So if I've interpreted that correctly, if they haven't, please put that up there again, or again send it on to you, Hannah, and I can help those person by email.
One more. Sorry, Breian, one more I'll just jump in there with as well. Just in terms of reference costs that you mentioned earlier, if you were to put up fencing, say post and rail, and the materials are grant aided up to €20.90 a metre, you're able to put in a claim for your time to put it up as well. Does that include if you get a contractor to put it up?
Yeah, so good question. And both are very, very important questions. So if you have the skills to put up the fence yourself and you're able to meet the specification as is set out in the department's documents, you can indeed put up the fence yourself. If your materials, I'll keep it simple here, come to €15 a hectare, 15 euro a metre, and the reference cost is €20.90, then you can put in €6 of your own labour plus €6 labour more yourself. It's asked at the claim stage. So if I was doing for someone, I put in the number of hours by the rate, and once it all exceeds €20.90 per metre, you'll get your full grant. So it's very attractive to people that has that skills. The second part of that is, yes, I know from the past that it's very unlikely that the material costs and the contractor costs are going to come under the reference costs. If they do, you can still put in some of your own labour for maybe a tractor or a machine of yourself that you had to bring the posts out the fields and leave them out for the fencing contractor. You can put in hours for that. So look, it's again, that's a claim stage, Una, that you talk to whoever's helping you put it in, but all of that is possible.
And lastly, are those reference costs, Breian, are they set for the next 5 years? You know, bearing in mind.
So they're set at the minute, Una, but with they do look at the economic factors.
Okay.
They were increased in the last couple of months, and again, depending on the economic factors external to the sector they are reviewed. But you know, some farmers would claim that they're not being reviewed quick enough in order for them to receive the benefit, Una. Rosalind has asked, only just completed build of house, full planning for stables and arena. We're in the process of securing land to lease. Can I still proceed without the lease? 5 hectares. Okay, so Rosalind, so for you to be eligible for the TAMS grant is great. You've got planning. You're ahead of probably a lot of people here tonight. But you won't be eligible on the TAMS system until you have a BIS application submitted with that 5 hectares on it. I'm assuming you didn't submit a BPS last year or previous year. So if this is your first year to declare the land, you're going to have to declare the land and submit the BIS first. The department pick up then those numbers that are being submitted, and it's computer generated, so they will maybe within a week or 2 or 3 weeks pick up that equine number has submitted a BIS. Then it'll make it eligible under TAMS if you want to then add it to TAMS and apply for your grant. So again, perhaps someone the equivalent to me would help you there to get all those items in order for you. And can you apply without hectares? A good number. So I think I've answered that for Rosalind there. And the last one.
Perfect, yeah.
Will you need the lease to be in place for greater than 5 years from payment or your TAMS payment? So that's if someone is putting facilities on lands that's leased. It's not that common, I'm assuming here. If you were to build something or put a gallop or something on leased land, yes, it has been done. And indeed, it could be more common actually in the equine industry than in others. Your lease, yeah, so when you apply for payment on that facility, if it's leased land, suppose when you're on a leased land and you have gallops and you're leasing the land for 20 years, you can get the grant for that gallop. But when it comes to claiming, you have 2 options. Either you prove you own it or you show that you have a long-term lease of minimum of 5 years. And so, yes, if you have a good question, it's at payment stage. So if you're applying now and your lease is going to run out, this is now March 2023. So if your lease is going to run out in March 2028 and you apply for payment in September of this year, that lease is less than 5 years at the day of payment. So it is a good suggestion there, and be prudent to get that lease extended now if you're going to do work on that land. If it's related to BIS, which is the 5 hectare eligibility rule, that 5 hectares can be rented or leased. It doesn't matter. You're stating to the department that you have this 5 hectares in full control and management for this calendar year.
Perfect. I think we just had one more in then. Do I qualify as a young farmer until I am 40, or is it just within the first 5 years after entering a partnership?
Yeah, fair question. This is quite harsh for people that were progressive and got their equine or herd numbers in their names in their 20s or early 30s. Once the 5 years is up, its class has been the data setup. If you're unsure of when your data setup was, you can ring your local district veterinary office and they'll tell you over the phone what your data setup is on their system. So if your data setup was any time prior, if you're ready with planning and everything ready to go tomorrow and able to get an application in, and your data setup was the 1st of April 2018, your 5 years will be up next week. And so it's important that it's under 5 years farming and you're under 40 years of age.
Perfect. I think that is most of the questions that have come through the chat, and I think we got through most that were sent in previously. So I'm going to say thank you everyone for coming tonight. Thank you, Breian, again for your presentation and your time. If anyone does think of any other questions that come in, we will follow up with them. And as Breian suggested, we would encourage you to go speak with your farm advisor or get in touch with your ACA member to help you go through the application process. Other than that, I hope everyone found it a very informative meeting tonight, and we will follow it up with some future topics as well around this around the TAMS information. The ITBA, I suppose ourselves, will be kicking off the Ask the Expert series in April and May with some really exciting speakers. And as Una previously mentioned, coming up on Thursday, we have our Western Region Breeders Evening, which will also touch on the topic of TAMS and is taking place in the Shearwater in Ballinasloe. So from myself, thanks everyone for coming. Thank you, Breian, again, and have a lovely evening.
Thanks, Hannah. Thanks, Breian.
See you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.